Welcome back. Today we are going to drill the holes for our sliding shelves and fit the top to the sysport. But first, here's the jingle. First thing I want to do is to mark the panels so I can put them back in the right position. And I'm using just some yellow tape. And on there we'll just write a very simple code, A, B, C, D and E. So you can be A, your B, your C, your D and you are E. So that will just allow me to reposition the places in the right place. So I now know that where the yellow tape is, that's the front of the panel. Where the letter is, that's the right hand side of the panel. The tape is at the top of the panel and the letter B signifies where these panels are. I now want to drill a series of 5mm holes at 32mm centres on this panel. This is my front edge because I've now got my indicator mark there. We're going to use the Sys32, and if you've not seen the setup video for the Sys32, go and check it out now. We look at how we set the thing up and how we calibrate it and talk about the use, so it's worthwhile having that knowledge. Job one is I want to work out how far my row of holes need to come from my front edge. These are the brackets I'm going to be using. They're 35mm full extension brackets, which means that there's still 35mm available here once those brackets are extended. And that's important because I want to be able to fully open the systainer without the lid banging onto the sysport. So that's why we've got full extensions. I want these to be positioned 18mm from the front edge, and as you're looking at the sysport, I want the drawer front to be covering that hinge so you can't really see, and it's just an aesthetic thing. So I know 18mm back. I am using the 5mm Euro screws to secure this bracket to the side, and this hole here and this hole here are the ones that take the 5mm screw. So this line of holes needs to be 18mm back plus the distance of my 5mm hole from the edge. I'm just going to use the calipers to work out what that hole is. So take it to 0, make sure I'm in millimeters. And now I want to measure from the end of my bracket to the centre of that hole, and that is coming out at 35mm thereabouts. So 35mm is pretty much where we need to be. So I take my 35mm plus my 18mm, I end up with 53mm. I now want to set the guide rails from the LR32 system to be 53mm. So I take my gauge, I take the 0 position and I find 53mm there. And I do the same on this one. I now want to position my rail on the board so it's snug left to right. I'm going to use the 32mm up and out as my starting point. The first hole I therefore want to drill is the open hole, which is there. So that's going to be my first hole. I now snug the board up against the end of my panel. So again, I'm using 32 millimeters, and 32 millimeters is going to be up and facing the outside of the board. And I snug this down so it's resting against the edge of the board. If I turn the board over, you can see how that now works. And you see the edge of the reference piece there and the edge of the reference piece there are snug onto that board. That's because this board is a multiple of 32 millimeters. It was 1024, and if you divide 1024 by 32 millimeters, you get 32. So this has now got equal spacing, 32 holes are going to be drilled along the length. And this second board isn't cut to the right size. The second board is actually 1022 millimeters long. And can you see there's a gap here now? So this board can move around on that rail. And that movement is enough to give you an inaccuracy when you're doing your drilling. If that board wasn't positioned perfectly against one of the rest, it could move as I'm tightening things down. I've got up to a 2 millimeter error of where my 5 millimeter holes will be. They'll still be spaced at 32 millimeters apart, but they could be off center by up to 2 millimeters. So when I come to put my shelf in or my drawer in, it will be twisted. That's why you want this to be the multiple of 32 millimeters, and we spoke about that in the LR32 setup video, and there's a practical example of what I was talking about. So I tend to make my panels multiples of 32 because once my holes are drilled, I can cut this panel down to final size. But if all my panels are the same length, multiples, I only have to set these brackets once, and that gives me repeatability. So all my holes are always going to be on the same centers between panels. Everything is going to be level, everything is going to be square. I now use these brackets that I've set to 53 millimeters, and I attach these to the guide rail, keeping it flat on the board, one at that end, one at this end. I want to make sure that my little silver reference guards are fully extended, and they then reference on the end of the board. And that's it. That will always reference in the same place on every board that's this height. So I can now go ahead and batch out the front row of holes for all my boards on the systainers. So it takes a few minutes to set up. Don't forget we're talking about it on the camera and explaining. It actually takes about 2 or 3 minutes. It doesn't take long at all. And now we can use our router to drill these holes. I've got the base attached, it's all centered, my dust guard's ready to go, and I've dropped in the through bit from the LR32 system, and that's because I'm going to drill all the way through this because I'm mounting things to both sides of the board. This rests onto the rail, and the alignment bracket slots into a hole. I now need to zero out this bit. So first of all, I'll set everything to a 0 position. Plunge down till I hit the board, and then lock that off. I can now push down here till that locates onto one of my posts and lock that off, and now I can finalize and set 0. So everything is now zeroed in. I now want to set my depth of cut. My board is 18 millimeters thick. I'm going to go all the way through the board, so I'm going to drill my holes to 20 millimeters. I can now release the plunge, release this, and I can slide up to 20 millimeters. I can lock that down and use the fine adjustment to make that exact. So now when I plunge down, it's going to give me a hole of 20 millimeters, or it will cut through the board. Before I start, I often need to take these brackets off, and I want to make sure that this rail is secured. These clamps simply slide into the T-rail and clamp the board from underneath. And that tightens onto the board, and then the same on the other end. Final check, make sure we're referenced on the edge. If we are, tighten everything down. Check the other side, we're referenced on the edge, tighten it down. And now we can go ahead and we can use the router to make this cut. Final check, everything's level, everything's tight, everything's flat, everything's clamped down nice and firmly. I can now take off these brackets. And there we have it. We now have a beautiful set of holes, and the great thing is this rail is now set up for every board. So I'll go ahead and I'll batch out all the other boards, and then we'll come back and look at how we work on the second line of holes.